let's see. I've never really understood the avoid tangent concept. So that's actually a good question. Tangents are one of those things that it's very prevalent in the 2D world, but kind of less so in 3D in the sense of they happen all the time in 3D. But as animators, we have to be very careful of when they happen, because a tangent is basically a optical illusion that will flatten an image or create unnecessary lines and focuses of attention. So for example, the most common tangent is, let's say you have an object here and then you have another one there. There's two separate objects, and a tangent would be if they were to touch each other perfectly like that. Now, they don't actually have to physically touch. That's the tricky thing with tangents. So for example, let's kind of go full screen here and do a little experiment. So a tangent in terms of the lining up kind can happen at any point. So for example, if I take my hands and I do this, you can see that my hands are touching. That is technically a tangent, but that's okay because it's a physical contact. So this works okay. But if we separate the hands and then I do this, we can see that there's one in front of the other. We get that depth. If I keep them separate, we don't see the depth as much, but if I do this and I bring my hands far away from each other, let's do that, we can definitely see that there's depth. So we can create depth in CG by having things overlap or by pushing the distance of objects. Now, the problem with a tangent is that if you line things up perfectly like that so that they just touch, what ends up happening is that you no longer get the feeling of depth. You get the feeling that there's a little tiny hand butted up right against this much bigger hand. Suddenly, I've got a little tiny baby hand for some reason. It creates the illusion that things are side by side. So when you have that, especially with depth, it will flatten an image and basically kill the feeling of depth. It's amazing how much that can trick the eye into thinking things are actually side by side. So in that sense, we want to push the tangent to overlap or separate. So you either have negative space in between or you have an overlap. That's the first kind of tangent. The second kind of tangent is the kind of line complexity tangent, where maybe things are side by side or they're close together, like the eye, for example. But so let's say we've got the eye here and we've got the top lid, and the top lid is going to brush up right against the iris of the eye right here. So we go there. What this creates is a lot of complex lines, because you've got a line, let's make sure I've got a color here, coming in here that then merges with this one, and we no longer know which line is which. Which one are we following? You see this a lot in 2D. 3D, it's not as easy to see, but the issue still happens. And then we separate it, and we're basically just unsure which lines to follow. A kind of more complex version of this is silhouette. So for example, if you've got a character's leg right here, let's do a very rough leg. What kind of leg is this? And then you have the other leg right behind it with the knee up here. Like that. This is a form of tangenting, but with the body. You've got both legs lining up with each other and then separating. And as an audience, we don't know silhouette-wise which leg is which. This is also called mermaid syndrome, where the legs connect together and then separate out. It looks like a mermaid tail. It's not a clear indication. So what we do is we create that separation. With the silhouette, we would push the one leg out a little bit and then really push the feeling that we see that overlap between the two objects. With the lines, it's similar. You would want to either push the eyelid so it's up a little higher, so now we can clearly see both forms, or overlap it down enough that you very clearly see that there is a stop and then a change in direction. It gives the feeling of depth, versus this where they're just touching and we don't know which line to follow anymore. So that's the basics of tangenting. Now there's a lot of other tangents in there as well. So for example, you have in comics you have screen tangents, which you kind of get in CG or like in animation if you're not careful, which is when a line lines up with the edge of the screen perfectly. You have continual lines, where this you see a lot in CG actually. So you might have your background, let's say there's a wall right here. So you get a wall right there, horrible little wall. And then your character, it might be pointing at something. Let's kind of move things out of the way. Maybe your character's standing in the foreground here, and they are pointing, hey, what's that thing over there? And their finger accidentally lines up right with the wall. So what this creates is this unified line that goes all the way through and makes it so that instead of looking at where the character is pointing, our eye follows this line, which is just the line of a background element that shouldn't be there. Or like, that is just a background element, not part of the story. He's actually pointing at this thing over here. So that creates another type of tangent. It creates a flowing line that isn't supposed to exist. So tangents, and there's a lot of others off the top of my head. I'm trying to remember exactly what they are, but it's the removal of tangents is the removal of visual confusion or visual illusions that can cause the audience to lose focus on what we want them to focus on. That's really what it comes down to. And Blaze, hello. Now, with that said, there are ways that you can use tangents in a way to push the visual design of a pose. So this is like, for example, what would be a good one? I'm trying to think of a good example of a pose. You see this with like fighting poses a lot. So let's say you had someone who's doing a sword fight, and they've got this kind of overhead stance where they've got the sword kind of up here, and I apologize for the quick doodles. Hopefully they read well. So you've got this kind of character, he's fencing, got his sword up, and let's see that back. I'm trying to invent a pose here and make sure that it reads. So you've got that, and then you want him to kind of put his arm out so he's kind of ready to fight. So you've got the sword up here, and this is the handle. Where's the blade going to go? Well, he's fighting this balloon. I don't know why a balloon on a string. Maybe he's got a smiley face on it. I don't know why. This is tired doodles. And Pazuzu, thank you so much for the follow. I really appreciate that. That's an awesome username. Pazuzu. So where do we put the sword? How do we position the sword to make clarity in this shot? Well, you could put it up here, but now it's just kind of pointing in a random direction. Yes, he's angling the sword at the enemy, but the dastardly balloon. Yes, see it. Let's make it dastardly. There you go. Now it's a villain. It's got the curly mustache. So we position the sword, and right now it doesn't mean anything. The sword is just pointed in a random direction. Needs a monocle. Yes. No, let's do this black. So I should make my brush smaller. There we go. So sinister. And let's give it a little cape. There we go. What's happening? A top hat? Yes, gotta have the top hat. I'm losing the point of my demo, but the balloon needs a top hat. There you go. Yeah, there. Now he's a villain. He was the villain all along. So the sword, if we just position it randomly, we can get the idea of the shot there, and that's not a problem. So it could be there, or maybe it comes down here. But where we put it can make the audience lose track of where they're looking. There's lots of terms for it. I tend to call it a hotspot. It's where our audience is going to be looking. So for example, if I point, most people are going to look at the finger, the end of the finger, and then where that finger is pointing to. So it creates a line. So even though I'm gesturing in this direction, people are going to look at the ends of the fingers, so the thumb and then the index fingers here, and from there they're going to create invisible lines to the next object that catches their eye. So if I do this, it brings your attention up there. If I kind of point this way, it brings your attention over there. If I do this, it brings your attention here. Now if you have multiple things, if you start doing this, and now the hands are just kind of pointing in random directions, and it's bringing the attention who knows where. It's just splitting the attention in all sorts of ways. That's not good, especially when we want a clear focus. So what you can do is imagine this invisible line of where you want things to be focused on. We want the focus to be right here. A little red nose now. So the one hand is lining up there, and then we draw another line there. Now, technically, this could be considered a tangent, similar to this one over here, where we're creating a line connecting things, but it's an invisible line. But in this case, it works well, because what it's going to do is it's going to draw the attention of the audience directly where we want them to look. So just by doing this, the pose is similar to what we had before, but now when the audience looks at that, they're going to follow it. So even if they look at the foot, it'll lead their eye up and then through to the character. If they look at the sword, their eyes are going to be drawn forward to the character. If he's looking at the guy, it brings it all there. All the lines are pointing to that character. Maybe he's got his leg up. Maybe it's kind of a kung fu martial arts thing. Well, I can use that as well, where the knee points towards that. It doesn't have to be exact, but kind of get in the general direction. And then the other foot, instead of just kind of pointing out here, if I really want to push that graphical element, maybe it kind of points back here. The reason, now it points back to the other foot, which brings our attention back up into the point. So everything is leading back to this point right here. Anywhere we look at pose A, it brings our attention over to the villain. That's good. Now, you don't have to go this far. Not every pose has to have every single element leading into the next one. But as long as you make sure that the main ones are there, in this case the sword, or the eyes, the point, those should really be focused on bringing the attention over to where we want the audience to look. So that's tangents kind of in a nutshell. It's usually a bad thing, because it creates an optical illusion of complexity or oversimplifies things to the point where we lose track of what they actually are. Another just kind of, this is not really a tangent, but another offshoot of this is the line complexity. So you see this often when you have a character with clothing or with like tattoos and stuff like that, and you're trying to line things up, where you might have, let's see how I want to draw this. Let's say you have an arm coming through here, just very basic arm here. And Sue Harrod, hello, how's it going? Let's say you've got an arm here, and you've got the body next to it. So how do I want to do this? Okay, so let's say you've got the body here, so arm and then the body there. Well, you'll notice that we get this T shape. This T right here, this overlapping T shape, is actually a really good shape to have. This creates the feeling of depth in a pose. So for example, if you have the body like this and then the arm just comes out like this from it, this looks fake. It looks flat because we don't have depth. We don't see what's in front or what's behind different shapes. It's just everything lining up. It's the problem with why stick figures look so flat all the time, is because there's no room for overlapping shapes. It's just lines sticking out of lines. So to add depth, we create that little T shape. This visually shows us that one thing is overlapping in front of another. That's good. So let's say with the body here, it looks like this got a big head. We want to keep adding things. So for example, let's say we want to do a little bit more anatomically correct. So you've got the pectoral muscle here, which then overlaps over the arm right here. So what that's done is it's given us another T. So we've got that one there, and then another one here. And then this is what gives you the armpit. Is those shapes right there, and then you have the form underneath there. Okay, now you've also got the deltoid right here. That'll overlap the pec muscle, so we get another T right there. You can see how we're starting to get all of these little shapes through here. Right there, right there, right there. These overlapping forms. It gives depth to the shot. The problem is when these get more complex. So that T shape, the 3 lines coming in, it's 1, 2, 3. That gives a nice feeling. If you start increasing that, it gets too complex. We can't focus on things anymore. So for example, let's say there's a background element. Maybe the character is wearing a cape or a shirt or something. And you've got this other line that comes in right here. Well, now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 lines coming into one point. And what if there's another line, maybe from, let's say they are wearing a t-shirt. Let's kind of get rid of that. They're wearing a t-shirt, and then the line of the t-shirt lines up here as well. Now you've got 5 lines all leading into one point. This is not good. This creates a lot of visual confusion because it's just bringing all of our attention here. We don't want to be looking at this character's armpit. That at least usually we wouldn't be, unless it's crucial to the scene. But because all of those lines are converging onto one point, it draws our attention to it. As humans, it's gonna bring our attention there. So we need to make sure we offset things. This is another form of tangent. So instead of having the sleeve line up where it would go to that point in the arm, we would push it here. Now it's offset. Maybe this cape or background element, we push that so that might come down over here. Fixed. We just offset the lines a little bit, and now we're just keeping those nice T shapes, those 3 lines. Technically, you could count it as 2, but it's 1, 2, 3 point, 3 edges coming into 1 point, right there. Nice and clean. And you have this in modeling as well, in a sense. So when you're doing modeling in Maya, you want to avoid having polygons or points on your model where you have too many edges coming into 1 point. It creates this very complex setup that pinches when you start trying to model or rig or sculpt things. Instead, you want to make sure that you only have up to 5 lines going into 1 point. Typically, it's going to be 3 because we're working with quads a lot of the time. Or did I say 3? 4. So you're working with quads. So you'd have 4 lines coming into 1 point. But maybe you want to make an edge loop somewhere. So you would split this. Now you have 5 coming into 1 point, which could work. That's not a bad thing. But you wouldn't want more than that. The moment you start getting into 6 or more, it tends to break things. Vice versa, with modeling, you also want to make sure that you don't go over faces that have 4 sides. It should always be 4 sides. 5 if you absolutely have to, but ideally not. Usually 4 or 3. So this would be okay. 3 sides, 3 sides, 4. But we wouldn't want to have more than that. That would be considered an n-gon. And those tend to distort your rig. We kind of went off a little bit from the tangent talk a little bit there, but hopefully that makes sense. If you have 6 sides, could you simply divide that into 3? Yes. So if you have a 6-sided object, so let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, you could just go whoop, and technically now you have 4. There we go. Done. So you can very easily split it. If you have a 5-sided object, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that, you could split it into a 4 and a 3 if you wanted to. Or you could go even further and try to split it with an extra split like this. So now you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You can see that's 5. But if I do this, now I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So you can split faces into different ways to push your detail and kind of get more visual clarity, or I shouldn't say visual clarity, just a cleaner edge flow by splitting them. There's really no reason why you should have a 5 or a multi or more than that sided face. And really the big reason for this is when you are trying to or when the computer's trying to calculate how to show the object, it doesn't know how to do a multi-sided face. And I can kind of show this in Maya here very quick. So let's go here. Okay. And let's just take a polygon cube. And we'll just isolate this. Maya's running a little slow because I've got so much stuff running. So we've got this object, and you'll see it's all four-sided faces. Now, the reason 4-sided faces or 3-sided faces are really good is that it's easy to calculate, especially 3-sided. So if I cut this edge right here, we'll put just on the top edge. The reason 3-sided is basically the preferred thing in video game engines and in most kind of live rendering stuff is that they're very easy to calculate. They are always planar. A 3-sided object, no matter what you do to the 3 corners, it will always be flat. So for example, if I do this, I can move my camera to a point where perfectly flat. I take this point up here and just move it way up there. Well, take my camera and line that up perfectly flat. It's always planar. There's no angle on a three-edged object that will have a bump or a distortion to it, which means that when Maya is, or any program is rendering this and trying to calculate what face or what side that face is looking at, it's done. It's easy. There's no calculation needed. It's right there. That's very good. It's very fast. Now, with 4, it's not as easy. For example, I can move this up and we get this. But which side, how is this actually shaped? Is it bent along this edge? Is it straight along this? So for example, if I move this down here and move my camera right there, it looks like there should be a bend right in front of us going horizontally. But if I move my camera here, you can see it. It actually, like right there, now there's this straight line. There's this clear line right there that doesn't really have an edge, but it's there. This is Maya guessing at what you want to render this face as. It takes a little bit more calculation. And the more edges you get, the more it has to calculate, and it's not going to have any idea how to properly process that face. So with 4, it's okay because it's just on that edge where it's not that complex. Honestly, like if you were to try and go, oh, how do we want that face to be? Maya is really just going, I'm going to pick and I'm going to say it's like this. And now you get 3 sides and everything works well. Or it'll go, nah, let's render it like this. And now we get that bend in there. So that's really all it's doing. It's adding one edge and then going, yeah, done. And this is something Maya does in the background right away. So if you, I wonder, I'm trying to remember, is it display, polygons, tessellation? There's a way to see that. Forget where. Display. But basically, as you're working, Maya is always tessellating the object, making it into triangles so that it can be properly viewed. So that's not a big thing. But as soon as you go into more edges, more faces, 6, 8-sided edges, Maya can no longer keep up with it properly. And when you start rendering or you start doing other things, it's just gonna burst at the seams. It's not going to work very well. So just something to keep in mind. It's kind of a tangent from the tangents. Of course, I would tangent on the talk on tangents. But it is one of those important things that we have to keep in mind. And Tuxiana, hello! So hopefully that's helpful. And let's see if I can get Maya to cooperate with me here. Oh, that's fine. Boop. I've got to finish this project and then I can try to get some feedback in a little bit, if that's okay. I'm amazed at how deep you went with it. Thank you so much for the class on tangents. As soon as the stream ends, I'll download and save it. Awesome. Tangents, actually, tangenting again. I want to find an image here. Tangent types. Graphical. There's an image that helped me learn about graphical tangents, or is it comic tangents? Yeah, okay. I totally forgot about it until here. So this is the one that taught me. So much better drawings than what I did. So I'll give you guys the link. This is Schweitzer Comics. And you'll see here, these are the different types of tangents that you'll get in a comic book. A lot of these apply to animation as well. So one line like long line tangent, when one thing lines up with another, it creates the feeling that his hat is really, really long. Or in terms of animation, it draws the attention away from where we want to be. Because we're dealing with color a lot of the time, you're going to see the color difference, but it still draws the attention away. You get the parallel. So this was one I missed out on, is when two lines just line up perfectly with each other, but they have no connection. So for example, the gun here and his arm, there's no connection between there. It's not like the gun is pressing against his arm, but it creates that feeling because the lines are matching up perfectly. You get the corner tangent. So this was what I was talking about, where the lines meet up and you start getting overly detailed corners. And this happens in CG all the time. When you've got different props, different scene elements, that can happen a lot. The bump up, that's the typical tangent that when we talk about tangents, this is the one in animation that first comes to mind, is the bump up, where two things are just kind of side by side. Directional, similar to the line tangent, it's just things lining up too well. Now this one we don't have to worry about in animation typically, is the panel to panel, where you get a tangent from one panel of your comic to the next. Because we're doing sequential images, we don't have to worry about this. But if you're doing a cut, it is something you have to pay attention to a little bit, because things can line up in weird ways. This we don't have to worry too much about in animation, because this goes into a cinematography rule. So a fake panel in comics, because you're already working in panels, if you cut the screen like this, it creates this feeling of two panels, which doesn't really work. You would want to break that up like so. In animation, this would be a frame within a frame, which is actually a good thing. So a frame within a frame, let me find some examples here from film, is like this. So you shoot your shots in a way that frames up the characters. So something like this, where we're looking through an object and framing the shot. So it's literally a frame within the camera frame. And this creates a sense of enclosement, of maybe being trapped. It makes the characters feel like they're not free, or it can make them feel oppressed. Sometimes it can make them feel safe. It really just depends on how you position the camera. So even this is technically considered a frame within a frame. So this is where it'll differ from film to comics. In comics, we wouldn't want this because it literally splits the image and makes it feel like there's two panels instead of one. In film, we can do it because we're not seeing panels, we're seeing a sequence of images. So we get that it's not two separate images, if that makes sense.